Real Men Feel with Andy Grant encourages men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been told, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to engaging in discussions that most men aren't having, but all men can benefit from. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. Now let's get to it. Hello and welcome to another edition of Real Men Feel. This is your host, Andy Grant. You know, a couple months ago, I was scouring the internet, putting together the Real Men Feel Guide to Friendship, which you can download at realmenfeel.org/gift. And this puts you on our newsletter to get show updates as well. And again, that's realmenfeel.org/gift. And this is a collection of virtual and physical places that men can make more male friends, because I hear that's a common thing, that guys don't know where to find new guys to hang out with, to share with. And I came across a site, Evryman.com, and I saw Owen Marcus's picture, and I had this strange deja vu. And it was because 2 years ago, Owen was on the show. It was back on episode 88. But I decided that surely plenty has changed in 2 years for me to forget that he'd been on the show and to see what's up with Evryman. So I'm very glad and excited to welcome back, Owen Marcus. He has explored and developed programs that bring together mindfulness, somatic psychotherapy, and the science of emotional physiology for 40 years. His men's group and this alternative model were the focus of the documentary About Men. His book, Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, lays out how to complete the 9 stages of emotional maturation for boys and men. He is the director of education at Evryman, and he created that with some co-founders, and it's using emotions and physiology as tools to create fulfilling relationships and purposeful lives. That's a lot. Welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be here. You pretty much just laid out the show right there.
Yeah, you've done a lot. It felt like 2 years ago, Evryman was just kind of getting started. I noticed it's even become a different domain. So has this really grown and become more of what you're up to?
Yeah, this is 100% of what I do. I mean, I still do some coaching off the side, but this is my main focus. And as you can imagine, yeah, we were all live events, and then we started getting into virtual stuff. Then COVID happened. We went 100% virtual. We have a membership now, and we support guys in virtual groups, which are actually working way better than I would have thought.
Oh, really? Oh, so then what about being virtual has surprised you?
Well, you know, I've been doing men's groups for a few decades, and and as you know, I created my own unique model, which became Everyman's model. So we really take guys a lot deeper than they normally would go in other settings. And so they get powerful changes and amazing things, and interactions happen in these live groups. So I go, well, virtual, I mean, that's just going to be sort of superficial. What I'm finding is that guys really connect. So we do these global calls every Tuesday night. And so you literally get guys from all over the world. And some of them have no experience with any of this stuff, maybe very little with virtual. They show up and we put them in a breakout group with a few other guys, and they come back and they're blown away, because just connecting even virtually to a man in an authentic way is so unique and new that it just opens up another set of possibilities. And then we've been doing it long enough in the virtual world that we have these ongoing groups, and these guys are giving us this feedback, like for an hour and a half, once a week, these say 6 guys get together, and they're a tight group, and they might be literally from all over the world. They pick a time of the day and they're there.
During the pandemic, I got into a Mankind Project group for myself, because I need some support. I want to just be able to share. And from my perspective, it seems that being virtual almost lets more of your guard down. Like there's still that separation of space, makes because you're at home, maybe you feel a little safer to share more than you would, especially in like a first in-person meeting. Is that at all resonate?
I think you're right. I think there's some upsides and downsides. And another upside is it's really convenient. You don't have to go any place. And a lot of these guys wanted to do groups, but they were in small towns that couldn't get enough guys. And so now it takes that away, and it takes the time thing away, so they can pretty much do it anytime, any place they want. And you're right. For a lot of guys, they feel safer in their own house. Now, some guys, because the family, whatever, it might be a little harder because they can't get the privacy, but they seem to find a way to do it. Some guys will go out in their car, put headphones on or whatever. So it varies. But we're finding that we're just able to appeal to many more guys than we ever could before.
Cool. So COVID seems to be having a positive impact on every man. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from guys about how the pandemic is affecting them individually?
Well, the research shows this, that first guys tend to be isolated, particularly as they get older, and then with COVID, we all know they're more isolated. That slowly started changing a little. Now we're going back into the winter, and that's probably going to produce more isolation. So this is a great way to not be so isolated and feel connected in an authentic way with other men. So that has been a real driver for guys that probably wouldn't have done it before. Now they have to. And I also do couple trainings with my partners, a couples therapist, and we're finding that these couples are struggling because before they had a lot of diversions. Now there's no escape. So they're literally forced to deal with their relationship.
Yeah. And I have personal experience of that as well. I'm coming up on my 23rd anniversary. And in this pandemic, my wife and I sought out a marriage counselor because, it was just, she still goes to work. She works at a hospital, so she physically goes there. And I don't see, another human in real life except for her. And it takes some toll. It changes things. It's interesting. Yeah.
It does. And we get into the whole stress in terms of the science of it, but really, how do we support men in that stress response so that they don't go to more and more disconnection and withdraw from that relationship? And, supporting these guys and sort of teaching them within their groups or these other experiences we have with Evryman to connect with themselves so they really can go connect with their partners and their family in ways that maybe they weren't even doing before COVID.
What got you first involved in men's work? Was it as a coach? Was it as a professional? Or were you a client and wanting some personal growth of your own to begin with?
Sort of all that. I got involved in the mid-90s. I had a medical clinic down in Scottsdale, and I was sort of downsizing that. I knew I needed to do something else to really improve my relationships with women. And I thought, well, maybe I'd work with men. Oh, I don't want to work with men. And that was a sign that, oh, maybe I should. So I did a training. I started a group in my clinic. It was mediocre. Ended up moving to Northern California for a year, helped start a new group there. And that was great. I go, okay, this is what I want. Tried a few groups here in Idaho, didn't work. And then 16 years ago, I redesigned the model using everything I learned in somatic psychotherapy, physiology, trauma work, to really work with guys, not so much on a mental level, but more on a physiological, emotional level, sort of bottom up rather than top down. And I found that a couple of things. One, it worked, but guys really like that. Guys like when it's more physical. We're physical. We default to the mental, but what gets these guys so engaged that we really are working with the body and emotional interface.
So that's the emotional physiology that so much of your work is on. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So we all know at least the parameters of that. So we know what stress is. We know that, stress is basically a survival response. So in survival, we generally think of, we got two things we do: fight or flight. We either, go after, pursue, attack, or we run away. Well, there's a third option that more and more people are becoming aware of, which is the freeze response. So when a mammal can't run or fight, they go into shock. They mimic death, and hopefully the predator leaves, and they literally shake that off, and the body just shakes, and they reset, and they're fine. But what happens with PTSD, we never get to shake it off. So we stay in that frozen state, which is psychologically a state of disassociation. We get disconnected. And it could be a lot of what I call micro traumas or stress, or it could be a major trauma. And so we create that model for guys, and then we use our form of sort of somatic mindfulness to keep the guy aware of his body and his physiological response. So I was one of them. For a lot of guys in the beginning, it's a lot easier to be aware of our bodies than our emotions. And it's really that physiology that takes us out before our emotions take us out. Because when we start to go into that survival response, even though logically we don't feel threatened, but subjectively or internally, we are having that survival response, we immediately disconnect, and we're either going to go into one of those three. We're going to fight. We're going to fight with our partner. We're going to withdraw or run away, or we're going to sort of freeze or shut out, which is going to feel like a runaway. And when in a relationship, then that triggers our partners, because on a subliminal level or unconscious level, they feel us checking out. So that makes them feel unsafe. And so they're going to do one of those three things. And then the whole spiral sort of just continues to perpetuate. And then you got a problem where, one, we explain it, but more than that, we help that man's physiology and emotion sort of back them out of that place and develop skills and more resiliency. So when something happens, they don't go into that survival response. Or if they do, they know they do, and they go, oh, okay, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to feel what I feel. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to be vulnerable or reach out and try to connect to this person.
I've certainly heard of animals in nature, mimicking death to survive. I've never kind of heard that or thought about that in relation to men. So is part of checking out, is shutting down, is part of that mimicking our death?
Yeah, well, yeah. And so all mammals are hardwired. When we can't run, we can't fight, we'll sort of go into that shock phase. And so the predator looks at us and we look like we're dead. Our breathing shuts down. We're not moving. And so the predator, leaves and comes back and says, well, I'm not real hungry now. I'll come back for my meal or bring my family and we'll have a feast. Well, 5 minutes later, like if you're, I live in the woods of North Idaho, and if the mountain lion takes the deer down, and then the mountain lion leaves, about 5 minutes later, the deer's going to stand up, and what you will see, and there's YouTube videos on this of mammals, they literally shake. They discharge that stored up fight or flight response. They drain it off. And then that's the reset. So when you do that, you don't have any PTSD. The post-traumatic stress disorder is when your physiology, let alone your emotions, but really your physiology doesn't have a chance to sort of go through that cycle of discharge. And so we have decades of that cycle building up, one drop at a time. And then your wife looks at you the wrong way on a bad day, and boom, you're in that survival response.
Is the predator in men's lives that, being judged as weak or seeming vulnerable or anything that challenges our view of masculinity, is that what we see as the predator that makes us shut down?
Well, that and our partners, or the guy that drives by, and you're driving and he cuts you off. It's the, media knows this. I mean, it's all that news that we see that gets us all riled up. It could be anything. Okay. I mean, so once we've had a history, it doesn't take much to re-trigger it.
Gotcha. And then the getting in touch with the body. If you're a man that really hasn't done much with identifying your emotions and feelings, so the easiest way is to then get in touch with your body. So it might be just as simple of a start as noticing where you're tense or where you're sore. Is that kind of the entryway?
Where you're tightening up. So you're sitting there with your wife, and maybe you don't know what's happening emotionally, but you realize you're starting to grip your hands, you're gripping your jaw, your heart rate's going up, your face feels flushed, and then you go, well, I'm getting angry, or you're getting it, you're moving around, you're sort of looking at the door, or you're looking at your watch and go, okay, when can I leave? Or you're just checking out and you're thinking about the baseball game you just watched.
So it's really for humans, and any stress is treated like a predator, and exactly. We just keep storing it if we don't learn how to shake it off, as you said.
Exactly. And the ability to shake it off is as instinctual as our ability to to go into the survival response. Now, here's one of the little bonuses is, and the research supports this too, connection, as a therapist would call secure attachment, real connection down-regulates the stress response. So they've done research where, you and your wife have a good relationship, you're experiencing pain, like they put your arm in something really cold, so it's not hurting you, but it's painful. And then she comes by and touches you, your pain goes down. And so secure connections will down-regulate a stress response. Now, insecure, negative connections or relationships will escalate it.
And it only makes sense that if in any situation, if I feel like people have my back, I'm not as stressed, I'm not as worried or concerned.
Exactly. We work with special forces and other elite units, and that's what they find, and it's real critical that in their teams that every man trusts every other man. And if they don't, the guy's off the team, because that you could say that's one form of secure attachment, because they can't be worried about watching their back.
Yeah, you have to have ultimate trust in your brothers.
Right.
Yeah, cool. So you say the instinct, that it's instinctual to shake it off. So what are we as men not doing? What instinct are we ignoring to release
Well,
that?
that's a good question. So the variable that needs to be there to shake it off is you have to feel safe. And that's one of the secrets of our groups is if all of us, we're not going to probably, slow down or shake it off or be vulnerable, which are all sort of the same thing, unless we feel safe. And so we have ways of doing it with our groups with, certain agreements and all. And so a guy will start to go into that response, and then he's encouraged to, sort of go with it, feel it, experience it, share it. And he can do that because he knows that the other guys, even in a virtual group, are there to watch him. Because 5 minutes earlier, he saw it with another guy. So his head knows it, and he's willing to trust his emotions and physiology to take that risk. And he takes a risk of being vulnerable or just being more uncomfortable than he's been in a long time. Or in other words, to stay with that experience, and doing either one of those will downregulate that stress response, and it will take a little of that away. So next time he's a little more resilient.
Did you have personal experiences that made you such a fan of men's groups?
Yeah, I mean, the first group wasn't, but the second group, I just saw that, when guys are committed and they're vulnerable, really a lot happens, and you really have that safe environment. And one of the things that happens in these, safe groups is that guys get to not only witness other guys, but they get to try new things that they can't any other place. And one of the things I've said for years is, you don't sleep with those guys, you don't work with those guys. So you don't really have other relationships with them generally. So there's nothing at risk other than your own maybe ego or whatever that is in yourself to take a risk with these other men. And that is often what tilts the scale for these guys changing. Because we're getting more and more therapists joining our membership, and a lot more men and women therapists sending us guys because they realize, and Dahlia, my partner, is probably the biggest fan, that a lot of these guys, what they just need is not so much therapy, but just to learn that skill that we're talking about.
Right. I get, yeah, when there's a group of men and their only role in your life is to encourage you to take a risk and to hold you and make you feel safe and not judge you for taking that risk, like that makes it easier.
Yeah, and that is instinctual. We're tribal, and men, traditionally go out on warring parties. They go out and they hang out and they do stuff. And so another thing that works for men, and one reason these groups work, is guys orient around an activity. Women can just hang out, drop in, and be vulnerable, and they just do that. Yeah, I guess technically guys can do that, but we do better at connecting with guys when we're doing it in or around something else. So we create, a set of agreements that these guys agree on, and some protocols, and it gives them the structure that guys need. And then the other part that happens is guys are competitive. And we see it in our trainings, and we see it in its groups. It's like you and I are going, and Joe next to us bumps it up a level, and he gets really vulnerable. And I'm going, hell, I'm not going to let Joe beat me. I'm going to be more vulnerable. Yeah. And pretty soon, and I've seen this in so many groups and trainings, is you go around the circle, there might be 50 guys in the circle, and it just gets deeper and deeper. And not every guy, but more and more of the guys just take more and more risk because, one, they know it's safe. And two, it's like, if he did it, I can do it even better.
Yeah. I've experienced that too. And it's neat that our natural competitiveness can be used to support us in each other, as opposed to denigrate, or, someone doesn't win by, winning the group somehow, but it makes all of us up our game and using it to help us.
Right. And then what happens, and you've probably seen this, and the other guys start complimenting or honoring you for your risk, which is the opposite of how we were brought up.
Right.
It's they put you down, they tease you, you're not man enough, but now you take a risk, you share your shame, and guys are like in tears, or they're honoring you about, the courage it took to do that.
Yeah. I keep saying more and more that authenticity and vulnerability are really superpowers that not enough men are taking advantage of. But again, when you display that, it gets rewarded. Like, I learned this over years. Every time I was authentic in some public video or speaking engagement, the more risk I took, the more feedback, the more I connect with people, I just kept getting reinforced that I'm discovering I can't overshare. That's not a thing.
But people want that connection, and the conduit for connection is vulnerability.
Yeah.
And we grow up in a culture that's very mental, so we think it's a lot of things. But the vulnerability creates a physical response, which is we relax. Because when you're vulnerable, you're telling me on an unconscious physiological level that the space is safe, that I can relax. Because if you take the risk first, you're proving that you're safe and the space is safe.
So what was the main mission behind the founding of Evryman to begin with?
Well, we said, and it still is, to put a million men into groups. So that's the sort of the tagline. But really what it is to bring this technology to men through peer-to-peer support. And what I've found, or we found, is that you give these guys the right kind of skills with a little practice, they will implement it themselves in their groups, and then without any real effort, it'll just naturally generalize into the rest of their lives. It's like when you give someone a nutrient that they've been deprived of, and the body just sort of relaxes, it starts to heal itself, it starts to get strong because it's getting what it's always needed. It may be the person was sick, but really they were just nutritionally deprived. And that's often what happens to men. We are emotionally deprived and deprived for connection.
And did you have to change any of the practices, the trainings, going from in-person events to virtual?
Not really. Huh? We changed the delivery of them, but certainly the essence are the same. I mean, we're shortening things and making it tighter, and sort of like you said with podcasts, everyone's going with COVID. Everything keeps moving to shorter and tighter. But the core principles and how we apply them continue to be the same.
And we've talked about this a little bit, but is there anything we haven't touched on that makes being in a group of men so beneficial?
We sort of touched on the loneliness. I mean, guys are isolated, and we know this, and the research supports. As the average guy in this culture gets older, he's more and more isolated. And you're seeing the bump of that significantly for men with COVID. In terms of suicide, drug addiction, all the indices are getting worse. And this is the antidote for isolation. And the research also supports that the cause of addiction is disconnection. So we get guys that are recovering addicts and they go, okay, I'm not an addict anymore. I'm not an alcoholic, but I want to work on really what got me to do that. Because that was a coping mechanism, which wasn't too healthy. So I'm not doing that, but where's the cause? And the cause in some form always lies in their ability or disability and around connection. And often, if I would suspect 100% of the time, but certainly seems like often it was precipitated by some kind of trauma.
So in someone reaching for something that becomes an addiction, is that more of a flight response, or is that a stuck response, or?
That's a good question. It's probably more the freeze response. I mean, I imagine what happens is that we freeze or we disassociate when it's too much for us. And when that's not working, we can't disassociate enough for us. We go find another behavior or substance that will take us even further away.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So if I can't get away from this far enough on my own.
Because feeling the pain of cutting is better than feeling the emotional angst about whatever they're struggling with.
Right. Yeah. So if I don't even want to feel the fight, the flight, or the freeze, I'll quickly turn to a substance to make me, or attempt to make me forget all about it. And
it does
but
for a while.
Yeah, but the toll still matters. The experience is still there.
Exactly. It always comes back, and it just festers. It grows. But what we found, and the new studies are finding, is that when you put these people, in this case men, together in an authentic way, and you save space, give them little skills, and you just let them go at their own pace, they'll start to naturally connect, because that's still in us. And when we get the connection and a secure attachment or relationship, the need for those addictions significantly goes away.
So did Everyman begin as strictly live kind of retreat weekends?
Yeah, we started with a retreat weekends. We have a couple different kinds of retreats or trainings we do, and then we knew it would happen. It did. These guys would have this experience in these weekends. Most of them were like virgins. They never had anything like that. They go, well, I want more. What's next? What's more? And we'd say, get in the group, and we would help them with the group. So we probably before COVID, we'd had a good 100 or more groups around the world, live groups, and these groups would transform these guys' lives. And these groups got written up in these magazines and newspapers like New York Times because they were providing for men what they never had as at least adults.
Do you expect and do you hope to return to live in-person events again someday?
We do. Like everyone, I think we expected it to be sooner rather than later. But on the other hand, it's given us time to really develop the virtual world of this work. And that's always going to exist, which is great for every man and really for men too. But we get men that really want to go to the live events. Some that been, they want to, another one, and others that connect with us and just imagine what it would be like to be with these guys in the real space.
Yeah, cool. And in your introduction, you mentioned I mentioned the documentary About Men. Can you tell me some more about that?
Yeah, that was a film that was done several years ago about our group, using our group as the example of not only what could happen in a men's group, but the technology that at that time it was just me developing, which later became Evryman. And so it was really about the group and a few guys in the group and what the group had done for them and also them and their relationships.
What are some of the biggest transformations that you have seen from guys going through a live event or working through the groups on an ongoing basis?
Well, we have guys, and one of them was on the film, that said if it wasn't for a group, he would have been dead. So that's a pretty strong observation. We got a few guys like that in our groups here in my small town. Men have transformed relationships, because probably the biggest reason guys join a group or Everyman is in some way they're struggling in a relationship. And again, a core relationship is an ability to connect, and they learn that experientially in a group. And then in most cases, that relationship transforms for the better. Sometimes it ends, but if it ends, it always ends on a good note. But we had guys that started, like my group here, that were sure that they were going to get divorced, but they needed support for the divorce. 3 years later, they got a marriage that's better than they could have imagined.
Yeah.
I mean, it took work on his part, which then catalyzed that woman to do some of her work. And then together, they transformed the marriage.
Yeah, because for so many people, it's like confronted with work. Oh, well, that seems difficult, hard. I guess, a divorce is easier. I'll just do that. Like people don't, or I shouldn't say people. Some people aren't willing to get over the hurdle. They think the hurdle means the end.
Right. And part of it is because they don't know how they could get support. They don't often see people that go through this process and come out better. And for a lot of guys, they think the only solution is therapy. And older guys are real resistant. Younger guys are more open to that. And well, my friends, including Dolly, my partner, seeing that, like her practice, you'll get 9 people a day calling up to be your client. It's just, she always had a big practice, but it's exploding. And a lot of these top therapists are having the same problem, because these guys with COVID and everything else is saying, all right, I'm willing to do the work. I have to. Yeah. And so that often just drives it. But once with the right support and the training or retraining, almost anyone can learn this.
What's the average time frame? We talk about training or retraining. Like how long does it take for the average guy to learn these techniques?
Probably 6 months, sometimes sooner, sometimes longer. But I would say for most guys, if they're showing up, with the Everyman stuff in their group every week, and they stick with it, and at some point it sort of gets rough. It's like getting in shape physically, but they stick with it. they're, in 6 months, they're generally going to be on the other side of it. Now, they can keep improving it, but generally speaking, usually after 6 months, the problem, it's either not a problem anymore. Now it's something that, they're enhancing, or it's finished. Like they finally realized that, if we're together, that it's just not going to work, but I'm not pissed at anymore because I'm not seeing myself as a victim. And so when that shifts in the man, his whole attitude to that relationship shifts. And then even if he does end it, he's probably not going to be angry, and it's going to be a lot more of a friendly divorce.
Is there any aspect of the Everyman training of your protocols that you can share here and now to give someone a bit of an experience?
I mean, it's a simple one that I created a while ago, and pretty much everything I created, I just created out of observing what we were doing, what was working. And we created the Everyman method, which is 13 steps, but I won't go into that. But what I'll give you is what we call the ROC formula, ROC. And men, women are using this, and they're using it in relationships, using it in business, using it in sales. So the R is to relax. You slow down to relax. Say it that way. You slow down to relax. You're slowing down your mind. You're slowing down your physiology. You're connected to your body, because nothing else can happen unless you slow down. And slowing down puts you in a safer physiology and hopefully a safer space. So that's the first thing. The next one is you open up to be vulnerable. You open up to your own experience as you slow down. What am I feeling physically? What am I feeling emotionally? Oh, I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling scared. Okay, where do I feel in my body? Oh, my gut, my heart. Great. Third one, C, is to reach out and connect. And so from that place of slowing down and being open and vulnerable, I reach out and connect. I take a risk. I might say, when you said that thing about your wife, and it really moved me, and that, and as I'm speaking, tears are coming down my eyes because I'm letting myself feel my sadness, and I'm speaking and moving that emotional energy at the same time, which is something new for a lot of guys. So that's ROC. That's something that I believe is instinctual for us, but we've unlearned, and with a little practice, we can learn it.
Yeah. Too many people have been told, got to speed up, got to hurry up. If you're not getting things done, just quicken your pace. And that's because part of the way that I choose to see COVID is, a bit of blessing of giving everyone more time, the opportunity to focus on what's out of sync. But if you just keep trying to speed up and I want to get back to the old normal as soon as I can, you're kind of missing this chance to slow down, to be vulnerable, and to connect.
Yeah, and just to take that a little further, because if you're sped up, you're probably in a stress response or survival response. If you're not, you're going to be pretty soon. If you're just going fast, it just sees the whole physiology to go into that phase. And so when I'm sped up, I'm disconnected. And my, Dolly or my partner or whoever is probably not going to be connected to me.
In your book, Grow Up, is that sharing some of these same techniques? Is this all rooted in all of your kind of research and discoveries over the years?
No.
Oh, okay. Is that totally different?
So, but the Grow Up book is 9 sort of phases or steps of how we grow up as a man, from a boy, to an elder or whatever. And what happens, and what I noticed there is, because of 1 or 2 reasons, usually stress or trauma, or because of the culture or the environment we were in, we skipped a phase. So if we skipped a phase, it's like skipping a grade. And it's like in that grade or that class, you didn't get to learn something. So you didn't get to learn math. So imagine going through life without knowing math. It'd be a struggle. So the purpose of the book is sort of lay that out and say to guys, all right, where did you skip over? But no fault of your own, but where did you skip over? And these are the things you can do to sort of go back and fill that gap, so that that gap does not become a hole that you keep falling into.
So is the book take you through the processes of filling in those gaps? It's not just,
I give suggestions and cues and exercises for each of those stages on how you can, go back and sort of do things to fill it in, because again, you might have gone through the phase, but because you were disassociated in stress or trauma, you really didn't experience it. Or you didn't have mentors or parents that, loved you, connected with you, modeled for you what you needed. So again, for no fault of your own, you didn't get that critical nutrient or that education you needed. And ever since then, you keep struggling. You wonder why. Well, it's just because you didn't get those things.
Cool. All this talk of childhood trauma, growing up with stress, does anybody grow up without trauma?
Yes, in theory, but probably very few in this culture.
Yeah.
I think where I've seen and from what I read, it's more likely in the more primitive cultures where they're more tribal, they're more nature-based, they're more connected to everything, to nature, to themselves, to their family, to their community. And so, again, it's not that you don't have trauma. That's part of it, but you can have trauma, just like that deer that gets taken down. He can have trauma, but really, is that trauma going to be PTSD trauma that keeps taking us out? And so if you have trauma and you got a really good community, you can be, like the deer, you can cycle through that physiology and emotions pretty easily and quickly and never have trauma. Like the Greeks and I think the Romans, they'd go fight the wars and the guys would come back and they'd send the warriors to sacred prostitutes to get them back in their body, get rid of the trauma. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that. Aboriginal societies would do ceremonies, a sweat lodge. I mean, a lot of ways to sort of slow them down, slow the physiology down, get them connected to nature, to themselves, to their tribe. And when that would happen, particularly if it would happen soon, there'd be no PTSD. Yes, they had trauma, but it's not traumatizing.
But so today in our current Western world, we all experience trauma. Very few of us experience ways to deal with that healthily while after it or during it. So it's almost like if you've made it to adulthood, you have a lot of childhood trauma.
Probably, yeah. And for some people, the biggest trauma they have was what the emotional focused therapist would call insecure attachment. And so maybe I didn't have any trauma or any stress in my life, but if my parents weren't emotionally available, at least 30% of the time, that's going to be traumatic for me because on an unconscious emotional level and ultimately physiological level, if you're my father, I don't feel that you're there for me. Even though I have a roof over my head, you're not an alcoholic, you're not beating me, but you're just checked out for your own reasons. And so I can't connect to you and you're not connecting to me. So that has my nervous system always be on guard. And I'm in some level scared and I'm compensating for that. So a child will compensate for that. And one of the ways, if I'm the kid, I'm going to compensate for it is I'm going to make it about myself. The reason we don't have a connection because I'm bad. And then that turns into shame. And then, I deal with it in coping ways that ultimately don't work.
Right. I think that it's important to realize for someone that maybe wants to call something trauma only if it was some, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. And if they didn't have that, they're like, oh, I'm fine. And you might be, but it can be just that father wound of the absent father, physically absent or emotionally not there, or the mother, anything like that. So a trauma can be the absence of something too. So you don't even realize.
Exactly. And we don't, and we don't think about it. We think of trauma as like a blunt force trauma. And it's certainly that there are a rape. But what I've found is a lot of those little micro traumas can ultimately be more severe than a major trauma in one way, because when you have major trauma, you have major trauma. So, you don't shame yourself. Like, I was raped, I was this. So yes, it was bad, but you can put it on something. But when you think you had a great childhood, but your parents were disconnected and you wonder why none of your relationships are working out and, you're struggling, you're blaming yourself and you don't know where to go for help.
Yeah. Right. And recognizing trauma doesn't mean you have to blame. No one has to be the bad guy, right, to have experienced trauma. Yeah.
Well, and so a couple of weeks ago, we did one of these global calls with 3 guys, or 2 guys and a woman. Elder Jackson, who was in the film The Work. He was a black man, and he got out of prison because of that. Brilliant guy, huge heart. Corey McCarthy, who's one of our guys, another felon that owns a construction company in Buffalo, New York. And then Fritzy, who's doing an amazing documentary film about trauma. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
The trailer for that film about trauma in prison. Yeah. And just trailer had me in tears. Yeah. And so the three of them were on talking about trauma, and how every one of these prisoners, that's why they were there. Every one of them was traumatized. Yeah. Yeah. And so what happened was, hearing that opened up this whole big discussion in our membership, because guys realized that first, a lot of them had trauma, and then it went to this other level of, well, maybe I didn't have the trauma that you had or you had, but really when I stepped back, I had a lot of these micro traumas. And in either case, what it does is it takes the shame away. And he goes, it happened to me. I didn't do it to myself. It's not my fault. I was a victim. Now, the shift is going from being the victim to being victimized and being a victim. And you always have the history of being victimized, but having that perspective of life of being the victim is where the shift happens, where what a victim doesn't do is he or she doesn't fight or flight. Because when I'm a victim, I'm powerless. And so if someone attacks me and I go into the freeze response and I don't do anything, coming out of it, I might have a lot of shame. Like I'm a weak man because I didn't fight back, or at least I didn't run away. And so I have all this shame about how I didn't perform. But really, my physiology took over. It saved my life. But I have all this shame. And so I keep seeing myself as a victim. And so this is where, a particular part of our work comes in, is that we don't usually explain this to guys until at the end of it. So I'm working with you. That's something that's happened to you. And so I get you to feel the experience of being a victim. And we don't even label it as that, but the fear, the frozenness. And then as you feel it, I slowly have you take action. But as you keep feeling the fear, for example. And so the amazing thing that happens is when you take action, as you feel the fear or whatever other emotion that was anchored in there, it starts to dissolve away. You stop being a victim, because it's like that's how you get out of that PTSD or freeze response. Because what happens is guys can take action, but so often they take action from a disconnected place. And so you get a lot of guys that say doing extreme sports, and they keep doing more extreme stuff because they keep raising the bar because they just need to do more to feel more. And so often they're disassociated, where if you really feel a lot and you take a literal action, that's intense. And so we work with guys staying in their body, staying in the moment, staying in their feelings, and just take a little action. And the first action might be saying no. Because if I was traumatized, raped, or whatever, I couldn't say no or act out a no. I couldn't defend my boundaries. I succumbed to it. And then I laid all that shame on myself.
Yeah, it's like if someone is a victim for a moment, for a circumstance, for some event, we have a way of replaying it, staying there, and making ourselves a victim for the rest of our life. And It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, and it's not meant to be that way.
And the culture does that.
Yeah.
In so many ways, as you know, particularly to men.
Yeah.
And we harm each other that way. And it was beautiful seeing the little documentary trailer and talking to these people, these, two ex-felons and Fitchery, about how, these prisoners would get in their own circles and start getting honest and vulnerable. And they hear one guy's story and that clicks something in them, and then another guy, and pretty soon they created this community of support rather than adversarial positioning. They were all supporting each other.
Right. Almost that competitiveness kicks in, and they want to show that I can be vulnerable too, like we talked about.
And these guys, some of these guys, they're going to be in prison for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But they're making a choice to not be the victim in prison, but be their own man and support other men doing the same.
Cool. Awesome. So What's the best way for people to learn more about Evryman?
Go to everyman.com, and the second E is missing. So it's EVRYMEN.com. So at everyman.com, we're in the process of changing our website, but on the top, someplace it's going to be signing up to come to one of our global calls. And the last global call every Tuesday night of the month is a co-ed one.
Oh, cool.
But the rest of them are for men, and it's 75 minutes. So that's a really great introduction. We'll have anywhere from 50 to maybe over 200 guys on the call from all over the world, different key, speakers. We've had some pretty well-known speakers on, and then they can do a free drop-in groups, which are 60 minutes. And then, you can join the membership and get more and get put into a group.
Cool. So when a new normal arises and you can have in-person events again, do you anticipate keeping all of your virtual offerings and bringing back the in-person things? Or
yeah, we will continue with the virtual, and we're developing some more virtual, and we'll probably use some of the virtual to supplement the live. One of the things I did over a year ago was a 7-month certification training, and so it was part virtual and part live, and so we'll continue to do that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate everything that you've learned and shared over your entire career, not just today in this episode. Because again, it's just such that this work is so needed. And it does seem to me that more and more men are taking advantage and are willing to be vulnerable, willing and wanting to heal, to improve their outlook, their happiness, their joy, their meaning in life. So are you seeing that too?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in it for decades, and just in the last few years, it's like an exponential growth for, I think, a few reasons. Another one is now COVID. And I just love working with guys, and, we're getting more and more guys, just word of mouth. We haven't really marketed the membership yet. And friends are telling friends, because you're right. Guys are hungry for this. Yeah. And you just give them the simple tools that work, and they'll do it on their own.
Yeah. Awesome. So visit realmenfeel.org, and the show notes will have links to Evryman if you haven't captured it. And missing that second E can be tricky. Yeah. So we'll have that. It'll be, if you're watching the video, you're seeing it now. If not, you just visit the website. We'll get you links and more info. And Marcus, again, thanks. I don't want to wait 2 years in between talking to you the next time.
Well, come and join us in Evryman. Love to have you. And thank you for what you're doing. And really, thank you for supporting these men and being a messenger to them.
Cool. Yeah, it's not something I imagined growing up at all. But yeah, I'm sure you find this too. A way that I heal and grow is by being of service. And that's not something that anyone told me growing up. No one ever stumbled into that.
I never would have thought I'd be doing this.
Yeah. Cool. Well, here's to more people doing what they never thought they'd do. I think that's what's needed, because again, we've been taught such a constricted, limited version of what we can be, and it's not true. All right. Beautiful.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Marcus. And until next, everyone, take good care of yourself. Be good to each other. Check out realmenfeel.org/gift for that free PDF. Get on the newsletter. Get up-to-date information about upcoming guests, past guests, be behind the scenes, and be good to yourself. Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Contact us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Learn more about author, coach, and healer Andy Grant at theandygrant.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would help us greatly if you gave a review wherever you are listening right now. It takes less than a minute and helps other people discover Real Men Feel.